On this Wednesday night, what we now know about that fatal Southwest mid-flight engine failure as airlines around the world scramble to test theirs. The latest from investigators on the first deadly U.S. airline accident in almost 10 years. The tributes to the victim whose work was devoted to helping others. And the dynamic backstory of a pilot now hailed as a hero.
Also tonight, the apparent diplomatic opening with North Korea and the cautionary lessons of the past.
And the gloves are off in Ontario politics. The Premier compares her rival to Donald Trump. He calls her government corrupt. Brace yourself for a rather vicious campaign. This is The National.
Engine failure and rapid descent. Even if you're not a nervous flyer, you probably want to know why the left engine of that Southwest Airlines plane broke apart in midair, setting off a terrifying chain of events that pulled a passenger from her seat partway through a shattered window.
They will begin to examine the inspection records for this engine and specifically for this fan section, these fan blades, to understand the inspection history and what type of inspections were conducted.
Helping investigators, the engine debris they've already recovered that came off the plane. And we're learning that the woman killed died of impact to her head, neck, and torso. Tonight, Canadian carriers are stepping up inspections of their 737s with the same engine to make sure they aren't at risk. The National Transportation Safety Board says its investigation could take up to 15 months. Our David Common has more on what they're focusing on.
Investigators already know what happened. Now comes the why. One of the engine's 24 fan blades broke off. The cowling shattered, sending shrapnel at high speed inside the plane. Bank executive Jennifer Reardon was struck. Her window ripped away. As the plane depressurized, the mother of two was partially sucked out.
Half of her was out the window, and so I made my way to her.
And they tried to bring her, reel her back in, and it just was crazy.
Investigators are focusing on that missing blade, already saying there were signs of metal fatigue.
It sounds like they found evidence of metal fatigue at the dovetail itself.
At the British Columbia Institute of Technology's aviation school, they have an earlier variant of the same engine.
If you've ever bent the tab off of the top of your can of Coke, you bend it back and forth and it bends and it bends and it bends and suddenly it snaps, that's metal fatigue.
It's still unclear why that blade broke and where it went, but it certainly caused damage inside the engine.
The fan would have continued to rotate 5,000 RPM or so. It's no longer a nice balanced wheel, and that starts to shake. The entire engine will shake, which would have possibly caused the inlet duct to actually depart the engine itself.
Southwest and the engine's manufacturer are now inspecting every plane. Other carriers, including WestJet, are proactively doing the same for aircraft with that exact type of engine. Meanwhile, what happened on board the Southwest flight is remarkable. Within seconds, passengers pulled the injured woman back inside the aircraft as pilots did an emergency dive, dropping 20 meters a second. A nurse and EMT left their seats with the outside howling in to perform CPR.
It just wasn't going to be enough.
As they tried to resuscitate that woman, it became so windy, so noisy inside the plane that another passenger actually used his body against the hole to try to block some of that wind, staying there, incredibly, remarkably, Ian, for 20 minutes through the landing.
Obviously, so much about these circumstances are rare, but you've been looking into the maintenance records of Southwest.
Yeah, so Southwest Airlines, one of the biggest in the United States, it does have some scrutiny over its maintenance record in the past. You know, one of the things is something their own mechanics say, that there's simply, they believe, aren't enough of them. So you look at a big carrier like United Airlines, they have about 11 mechanics per aircraft, whereas Southwest has just slightly more than 3 per aircraft. What does that mean in the grand scheme of things? Well, the NTSB, the investigators, you can bet, Ian, are going to be looking into that.
All right, David, thank you.
Thank you.
As for Canadian Airlines, David mentioned WestJet. It says it's accelerating inspections of fan blades on 737s, which already had been ordered by the European Safety Authority last year. Sunwing says it's begun an ultrasonic inspection program of 737s. And Air Canada says it doesn't use the type of engines involved in the Southwest incident. Calm under pressure, highly skilled. Tonight, there's a lot of focus on the pilot, Tammy Jo Schultz. Stephen D'Souza has her story.
If you're ever stuck on a plane with one engine, this is who you'd want at the controls.
Is your airplane physically on fire?
No, it's not on fire, but part of it's missing.
Air traffic control audio captured Tammy Jo Schultz calm and in control, what passengers called nerves of steel.
Could you have the medical meet us there on the runway as well? We've got injured passengers.
After a 22-minute ordeal, the former Navy fighter pilot safely landed the plane.
We're going to stop right here by the fire truck. Thanks, guys, for the help.
Moments after touching down, Schultz came through the cabin, checking on rattled passengers.
True hero, the courage it took for her to take control of that situation and really just save everyone on board is really just unbelievable.
But not so unbelievable when you consider her past. She told her story in the book Military Fly Moms, how she grew up in New Mexico watching fighter jets at an airbase near her home and dreamed of flying. In the early 80s, though, the Air Force rejected her, and even when she got into the Navy, she was constantly fighting to break down barriers. She wrote in the book, "We endeavor to teach our children to be leaders, not lemmings. This is especially important when it comes to making the right choice while the crowd is pulling in the other direction." During 10 years in the U.S. Navy, she was one of the first women to fly the FA-18 Hornet. Today, she's talking to investigators who praised her calm and assured handling of the situation.
My hat is off to them. They behaved in a manner that their training would prepare them for.
Training and perhaps faith. A devout Christian, Schultz once said that sitting in the captain's chair gave her the opportunity to witness for Christ on almost every flight. Stephen D'Souza, CBC News, New York.
And we're learning more about the victim who died on that flight. Jennifer Reardon was dedicated to helping others.
The more important thing is it's impacting hundreds of thousands of kids.
Reardon is being remembered as a community leader in her home state of New Mexico. As a vice president for Wells Fargo, she led the bank's volunteer programs.
She wanted the best, for this town, this state. And if you were saying, Jennifer, I'm struggling with this, she says, well, how can I help you?
Friends describe the 43-year-old as a bright soul with a huge smile.
She was just full of life. She had an energy when you would just see her.
Reardon is survived by her husband and 2 children. Here's what else we're following tonight on The National. An apology from the Pope on the Church's role in the residential school system is unlikely, but that's only part of the mixed message today from Canada's bishops.
And Tory MP Maxime Bernier is pulling his book, and the accusations Andrew Scheer won the leadership with, quote, fake conservatives. What does that tell us about what's really going on inside the party?
But first, is real change on the horizon for North Korea, or is that on shakier ground than we might think? The U.S. president tonight is once again managing to temper expectations around that upcoming face-to-face between him and Kim Jong-un. As Paul Hunter tells us, the day began with brags about great inroads being made in North Korea, but it ended with Trump himself making threats.
Rarely one to pull punches, Donald Trump tonight made clear, with an eye to his possible upcoming summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un, if things don't work out before or during, he'll walk.
If I think that it's a meeting that is not going to be fruitful, we're not going to go. If the meeting when I'm there is not fruitful, I will respectfully leave the meeting.
Trump's comments after a meeting today with Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe come as the U.S. was buzzing over that possible meeting with Kim. Aimed at denuclearizing North Korea, the summit seemed ever closer, with word CIA Director Mike Pompeo, Trump's nominee to be the next Secretary of State, had just secretly visited North Korea for direct talks with Kim.
He just left North Korea, had a great meeting with Kim Jong-un.
Tweeted Trump today, a good relationship was formed. Tonight, despite Trump's warnings things had better go his way, the president underlined
We hope it all works out. We'll be trying very hard.
Not so long ago, all of this would have seemed unthinkable as the two countries traded threats and insults. Former U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell today called Pompeo's visit positive.
I think it's good to talk rather than threaten bombing each other.
And consider there's another summit looming as well, involving the leaders of North and South Korea. That one aimed at ending, finally, the Korean War. Actual fighting stopped in 1953 with a truce, but for a variety of reasons, the two countries technically remain at war. For decades, lingering as a kind of high-stakes staring match backed up by U.S. troops in the demilitarized zone. Bottom line, lots could be changing on the Korean peninsula, and soon. Said Trump tonight he'll do what he can to make this, as he put it, a worldwide success. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
Now, our Sasha Petrusik has been watching the developments from Beijing, where it is now Thursday morning. So, Sasha, remind us when and how things started looking up in the first place.
Well, Andrew, it looked like there was a thaw in the middle of the Winter Olympics just a couple of months ago. South Korea invited the North to come down and participate. Not only the athletes came, but high-level officials came as well. There were talks, there were toasts, and the stage was set for what looked like progress that we haven't seen in quite some time. But, you know, there's nobody who really wants this deal more than the president of South Korea, President Moon Jae-in. Though his people in South Korea tend to be a lot more skeptical. They don't really trust the North. They say we've been down this road before. There have been many broken promises on both sides, and they're really not thinking that this is going to happen.
But I suppose we should note it's not just South Korea playing an important part in these potential talks.
That's right. It's not just South Korea, and it's not just the United States. South Korea, of course, is pushing very, very hard for some kind of an agreement. On the other hand, you have Japan, who Donald Trump is meeting with right now. They have been saying that the United States should not agree to anything until there is clear progress, literally until North Korea is dismantling its nuclear missiles, taking the bolts out and carting the whole thing away. And of course, there's China. Here in Beijing, there's a lot of attention on the prospect of these talks. You know, China historically is North Korea's closest ally. There was a period of a bit of a freeze in relations. They weren't even talking to one another. Now China is back, and you can be sure that anything North Korea agrees to in these talks with Donald Trump, if they happen, that will be sounded off the Chinese, and that the Chinese would have to agree to it. So this is much more complicated than just simply two leaders sitting down and trying to hash out a deal.
Indeed. Sasha Petrusik, thanks very much. So we know there is skepticism out there about these proposed talks. That's in part because North Korea has been consistently inconsistent. After provocation, Pyongyang often shows a sunny side, which doesn't last. Let's go back to the early 90s. Revelations of North Korea's nuclear program sparked a crisis. Then Pyongyang turned around and offered talks. In 1994, North Korea agreed to dismantle its reactors in return for aid.
This agreement will help to achieve an end to the threat of nuclear proliferation on the Korean Peninsula.
But implementation was glacial. There were missile tests, a naval battle, then smiles. In 2000, then U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright met with the North Korean leader at the time, Kim Jong-il. After flattery, gifts, and fine dining, an end to North Korea's nuclear weapons program seemed in sight. But about a year later, Pyongyang admitted it played a double game.
North Korea was pursuing a covert uranium enrichment program.
That regime was deceiving the world and developing those weapons all along.
George W. Bush talked tough, but got the same runaround. Pyongyang joined disarmament talks in fits and starts, setting off its first nuclear test in 2006. And then it agreed to shut down a reactor in exchange for fuel oil. Except that agreement, too, fell apart, as did another one with the Obama administration in 2012. So when it comes to these latest proposed talks, Trump's own director of national intelligence offered this last month.
Maybe this is a breakthrough. I seriously doubt it.
Trump's summit with Kim Jong-un could be historic, or it could be history repeating itself.
Nearly a year after Maxime Bernier's razor-thin loss to Andrew Scheer as federal Conservative Party leader, Bernier had plans to release a controversial book that challenged Scheer's leadership and could have jeopardized Conservative Party unity. But today, the failed leadership candidate is having second thoughts about becoming a published author. Our Catherine Cullen explains Bernier's sudden about-face.
In the glow of victory, Andrew Scheer leaned in and expressed confidence he could count on Maxime Bernier. But almost a year later, Bernier released a chapter from his forthcoming book claiming Scheer won because of fake conservatives. Bernier says they were supporters of the dairy industry who joined the party just to stop him from winning and trying to make big changes to Canada's agriculture policy. Scheer even joked about benefiting from that support.
I certainly don't owe my leadership victory to anybody in the Conservative movement. Sorry, I'm just gonna...
Bernier also wrote that while he'd promised Scheer to stop talking about his views on agriculture, he couldn't stay silent anymore. I will never again say the opposite of what I believe in and pretend this is a good system for the sake of party unity. Many Conservatives didn't like it.
We don't need that kind of a fight in the party.
I thought it was a distraction from a timing point of view.
But Bernier's own publisher seemed to revel in the controversy, bragging Bernier's book was already causing a stir. CBC News has learned that Bernier went into Conservative caucus this morning, and before the airing of grievances could begin, he told the room he was pulling the book. So just 8 days after publicly saying Andrew Scheer's victory was thanks to fake Conservatives, Maxime Bernier tweeted, "I realize that whatever I write, it will always be interpreted as me creating division and challenging our leader. For the sake of maintaining harmony within our party, I have decided to postpone the book's publication indefinitely."
You know what? I think he made the right decision. When he speaks on behalf of the Conservative Party, I would expect him to fall into line.
The question is, will Bernier hold his tongue? And will this hurt the political future of a man who came so close to being the party's leader? Catherine Cullen, CBC News, Ottawa.
In theory, and I say really in theory, the Ontario provincial election hasn't even started yet. But in practice, the politics and posturing have already started, and it's already pretty ugly. Doug Ford accused Premier Wynne of being all but a criminal, and things pretty much went south from there. Here's Mike Crawley.
Doug Ford kicked off the war of words by accusing the Premier of recklessly abusing taxpayer dollars. In a news release, Ford said, quote, "If Kathleen Wynne tried to pull these kinds of shady tricks in private life, then there would be a few more Liberals joining David Livingston in jail." That's this man, the chief of staff to former Premier Dalton McGuinty, sentenced to 4 months in jail for trying to wipe computer files about the cancelled gas plants.
Doug Ford sounds like Donald Trump, and that's because he is like Donald Trump. He believes in ugly, vicious, a brand of politics that traffics in smears and lies. He'll say anything about anyone at any time.
In a lengthy statement, Wynne accuses Ford of lying, bullying, and campaigning like Trump.
Doug Ford stands for nothing other than Doug Ford. And just like Donald Trump, there is only one way to deal with this kind of behavior. You have to stand up to him, and you have to name the behavior for what it is, because that is how you deal with a bully. Doug Ford sounds like Donald Trump, and that's
We play Wynne's comments to Ford to get his reaction.
he believes in ugly, vicious,
desperate person.
Ford's response?
Kathleen Wynne, she can fight an election in another country. I'm focused on the people of Ontario.
Ford accuses Wynne of launching a personal attack.
I'm not going to get personal with Kathleen Wynne because I'd be here for a month. This government is the most politically corrupt government this country has ever seen.
Ford ends his news conference after just one question.
Can you clarify what you said about her going to jail? Doug, you said she should go to jail.
The nastiness between Ford and Wynne is overshadowing the actual policy announcement that the PC leader made today. Doug Ford said if he becomes premier, he would lower Ontario's corporate tax rate, even though it is already lower than every other province. Mike Crawley, CBC News, Toronto.
Brace for a long campaign, I suppose. Okay, we have lots more ahead tonight on The National. They practiced medicine for years, but repeatedly failed their qualifying exams. Now, more than 1,000 former patients of 2 doctors are being told to find new care.
And as victims of the Quebec mosque shooting share their stories in court, we'll hear from 2 Muslim women on how life has changed in that city and whether it can ever truly feel like home again.
But first, the renewed push tonight for the Pope to apologize for the church's role in residential schools.
And after hearing what they said today, I'm disgusted. You probably noticed that I walked out because I wanted to go throw up.
When it comes to the trauma of residential schools, we learned today that an "I'm sorry" from Pope Francis and the Catholic Church seems unlikely. Katie Simpson explains.
So on a scale of 1 to 10...
They came to Parliament trying to offer clarity. Instead, leaders of the Catholic Church in Canada gave mixed messages about whether the Pope is open to offering an apology to residential school survivors.
If you place Pope Francis among Indigenous people and he hears these horrible stories, what do you think he's going to say?
Not only were the bishops non-committal, they also tried to distance the church from its ties to residential schools altogether.
When there are bishops, cardinals involved, this is not the whole church.
That message didn't go over very well with at least one residential school survivor.
After hearing what they said today, I'm disgusted. You probably noticed that I walked out because I wanted to go throw up.
Last month, Canadian bishops released a letter saying after carefully considering the request, the Pope felt he could not personally respond to the demand for an apology. The ask is a key finding of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which examined the generational impact of Canada's residential school system.
We will be laying out the case very clearly about the Church's complicity and role and obligation.
The NDP is trying to keep this fight alive.
No, we don't seem to have unanimous consent.
But its motion that would have Parliament unanimously demand Canadian leaders in the Church go back to the Pope asking for the apology was defeated by a backbench Conservative MP.
For the Parliament of Canada to be dictating to a faith community about the way in which it should approach reconciliation, I don't see that as appropriate.
This may be a setback for residential school survivors, but some are still using their voice to keep up the pressure on the Vatican.
We ask the Catholic Church to do the right thing.
The NDP will bring its motion back here to the House for a debate and vote as early as next week. Even if it passes, there's nothing in it that will actually force church officials to do anything. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Ottawa.
Still to come on The National, more than a year after the Quebec mosque shooting, some Muslims still don't feel safe in their own province. Tonight, you'll meet 2 women making very different choices on how to face Islamophobia in Quebec.
Tonight on The National, no escape for Justin Trudeau from the Trans Mountain Pipeline predicament. A handful of Greenpeace activists made their opinions known today as the Prime Minister arrived in London. His UK stop is the last of this international trip. On today's itinerary, a meeting with British Prime Minister Theresa May on post-Brexit trade and a visit with the Queen. Tomorrow, he's expected to attend a summit with other Commonwealth leaders. In Syria tonight, there are reports that a UN security team was shot at while visiting the site of this month's suspected chemical weapons attack. The team had gone into Douma to do reconnaissance work for a group of chemical weapons inspectors. As it stands, no reports of anyone on the UN team being hurt, but they were forced to retreat, and now it's not certain when inspectors will be able to access the site. Another round of misery for the people of Puerto Rico. Still struggling to recover from last year's devastating hurricane, today the entire island was once again hit by a power outage. And the blame is being put on a contractor whose excavator accidentally downed a transmission line. The officials say it could take up to 3 days to have power fully restored. And after announcing it would no longer sell assault-style rifles, Dick's Sporting Goods has revealed how it's dealing with the guns it still has in stock. They're not going back to manufacturers, they're being destroyed. Dick's made the decision to pull assault-style weapons from store shelves after February's school massacre in Parkland, Florida. It's also said it would stop selling guns to anyone under 21.
It was another emotional day at the sentencing hearing for the Quebec City mosque shooter Alexandre Bissonnette, with Bissonnette himself sobbing at times while victim impact statements were being read, including from the family of a popular Laval University professor who came to Canada seeking an escape from violence.
Alexandre Bissonnette will live the rest of his life, the rest of his days behind the bars. And for the entire society, it's the best thing that could happen.
That is Amir Belkacemi, son of Khaled Belkacemi, clearly still raw, even after giving a stark and unforgiving statement today in which he said, "I am certain this man behind me is a monster, and I feel strongly that monsters don't have a place amongst us." Amir's sister, Megda, also spoke today, though the tone of her statement leaned more towards sadness and confusion than fury. How could a man who is the same age as me, who grew up in the same city as me, someone I could have known, how could this person have taken the life of my father and 5 other fathers, destroying the peaceful lives of so many people? And Khaled's widow addressed the court as well. Like her daughter, she is still struggling to understand her loss. I have a lot of trouble accepting that he, a peaceful man, was killed by a gun. Khaled Belkacemi and his wife fled to Canada from Algeria years ago to raise their family in peace after terrorists assassinated the head of the university where he taught, an attack he very easily could have died in. Over a year after the attack in Quebec, some Muslims there still feel unsettled, constantly questioning whether they really are welcome. Tonight, in a documentary from our colleagues at CBC Short Docs, you'll meet 2 women facing Islamophobia. One who refuses to leave, the other decides to find a fresh start when her province feels like home no more.
I have lived here for more than 20 years now, and I think it's time for me to maybe move on. I felt that Quebec City was home for a long time, but I don't know anymore.
Life is really different. I don't feel like the way I used to feel before. There is Islamophobia in Quebec. We are not gonna lie to ourselves and say, nah, people, they don't, there doesn't exist. Yes, it does. But 19 years ago, I decided to stay, and I'm not gonna let someone else change my decision. The 29th of January 2017, that's something that we can never, ever forget. I remember that night, I was home with my family, even my husband and my son, they were here because they were supposed to go to pray. And my husband said, I'm kind of tired and, we're just gonna do our prayer at home. And I was like, okay, that's fine, good. We got a call from my friend, and she said something really, really bad, it's happening at the mosque. And really bad for me. I thought of fire or something, I don't know. But I never thought that someone could go to the mosque and start shooting people and killing people. I couldn't just believe it.
Most of the people who died, I knew them very closely. I get very emotional because something tragic happened which did not need to happen. It would take time. It would take a long time to heal from it. January 29th tragedy, that was a turning point. But before that, I have noticed that things started degenerating in the society. Muslims being targeted, some were insulted, assaulted, with their hijab torn away. Things that never happened before started happening. The radio station started nurturing that hate and rejecting Muslims, and the atmosphere became very poisoned in Quebec City.
Things began to change, I believe, since 2013, when the government tried to come up with this charter of value. From that time, I felt that, Quebec is not the same as it used to be. Le Parti québécois had that project to not accept a person wearing the religious symbol in the public function. We're talking about scarf, we're talking about the kippah, we're talking about the cross and everything. And it seems to me that they were talking more about the Muslim women than anybody else. I don't know, I felt it that way.
My son is a basketball player. He likes Quebec City because that's the only place he knows. The friends he has are from here. It will be difficult for me to move away. My personal experience is similar to many others who have been attacked and insulted in the street for wearing a veil. But I felt like being black and wearing a veil was just at the top of the top. Bringing together a race and a religious symbol was kind of just too much to the eyes of many people. At the beginning, I was not wearing the veil. I started wearing it long after I came here. The first time I started wearing it, I felt so powerful that day. For some reason, I don't know why. I was walking in the street with pride and confidence. I felt like closer to God somehow, and that was very meaningful.
L'islamophobie, ça nous dérange. Pourquoi? Pourquoi ça dérange? Why does the word Islamophobia make us uneasy? Well, it's because it goes to fears.
It's been 1 year now. We're trying to go back to our life, to get back our life as it used to be before. For me, I thought I should do something. I cannot stay home and, cry about it and think about it, but I have to move. I have to do something to help others. Aujourd'hui, je vais vous présenter un mythe ou un préjugé sur la communauté, ce qu'on entend dire sur les musulmans. Puis là, vous allez me dire si vous êtes d'accord, oui ou non, qu'est-ce que vous en pensez. Et puis après, on va corriger vraiment ce mythe-là. I got involved with the committee who was in charge of build the bridges between communities and more specifically between the Muslim community and the rest of the society. Maintenant, ce qu'on entend dans les médias, à chaque fois qu'il y a un acte terroriste quelque part, automatiquement, on pense aux musulmans.
Qui arrête d'associer les musulmans aux groupes terroristes que vous considérez même pas comme des musulmans.
I always insist, please, don't just believe anything you hear about Muslim. Try to go to Muslim people and get all the information you want, but get it from the source. Before I start this work, I was kind of desperate about what's going on, what's going to happen. I just couldn't accept it, and even thought like so many people, just leave, go back home or go somewhere else. Not only for me, but I can see my kids living in this place when there's a lot of hatred and bigotry and everything. With this job, with this position, it's like it gave me hope that things will change. I heard about some people live in Quebec. They just don't feel like it's home, not anymore. Some others, like me, I can continue. I still have the energy to continue to live here. For my kids, it's their home too. They are born here, and I don't see to take them from here and take them away, just because someone else doesn't agree, doesn't like us to be here.
I'm not running away from that. No. There are still people who will do that, will keep doing that. I'm just freezing. I feel sad to move and not be here. There's still a lot to be done. A lot has been done, but a lot still needs to be done.
You can watch the entire documentary, Home No More, on our website. Go to cbc.ca/shortdocs.
Still to come on The National, a CBC exclusive. More than 1,000 patients in BC have been left high and dry after finding out their doctors were no longer qualified to practice medicine.
Everything was going fine until we found out through our pharmacist that the prescription I had was no longer valid because the doctors were no longer, I think, certified in the province. And then we started digging around and we started finding out what was going on.
More than 1,000 patients in a BC town are scrambling now to find some new care. Most didn't know that they were seeing two doctors who had yet to pass their qualifying exams. In a CBC exclusive, Eric Rankin explains what happened.
59-year-old Ray White is a long-haul trucker with a heart condition. But when he recently tried to renew a prescription he needs, he was told it was no longer any good because his family doctors had lost their licenses.
I'm very concerned. When you're dealing with the heart, it's got to be, it's got to work. If it doesn't work, then you're dead.
White is among thousands of patients now wondering about their health care. Dr. Sean and Rosemary Cambridge, husband and wife physicians trained in South Africa, came to Chilliwack in 2011 and were allowed to set up a family practice under provisional licenses and with supervision. As foreign-trained doctors, they then had to pass their Canadian qualifying exams. But over 6 years, Rosemary Cambridge failed 4 times, Sean Cambridge 5. After repeated extensions, the regulatory body in the province finally cancelled their registration.
Honestly,
BC's health minister says supervision of the Cambridges appears to have been lacking.
I think a fair person would say that those weren't enforced as much as they might be.
But while failing his qualifying exams, Sean Cambridge was billing BC taxpayers an average of $600,000 a year for his 4 full years of practice. That's double the national average for a family physician and made him one of the top paid doctors in BC. In a written statement through his lawyer, Cambridge says, "We are proud of how hard we work to serve our patients, but it undoubtedly came at the expense of studying for our examination." BC's Health Professions Review Board, which rejected their appeal, was still sympathetic, ruling there's a deeply troubling pattern emerging where foreign-trained doctors often face overwhelming patient loads in underserved areas.
The Cambridges were originally placed here in Chilliwack because this town has a severe doctor shortage. Now, thousands of their former patients could find it next to impossible if they want to find a new doctor to double-check their medical diagnoses.
Ray White wonders why foreign-trained doctors can practice for years without passing their qualifying exams.
Can I go out and drive a semi for 6 months, 6 years before getting a driver's license, a proper driver's license, taking the exams? No.
Late today, BC regulators announced Dr. Sean Cambridge has now been cited for unprofessional conduct for failing to reveal he had first tried to practice in Saskatchewan, but was rejected, something BC didn't know when they allowed him to practice here. Eric Rankin, CBC News, Chilliwack, BC.
We should tell you that this is a somewhat rare case. Only a small fraction of active doctors in BC are working under these provisional licenses. But you might be surprised by how many doctors across the country face the broader problem of making their foreign credentials work in this country. Last year, there were almost 18,000 active doctors in Canada who obtained their degrees outside of Canada or the U.S. That's more than 1 in 5, according to the Canadian Medical Association. The highest number graduated in South Africa.
The Moment is coming up next, but as we go to break, remember, you can always go deeper on the stories of the day earlier in the day. Subscribe to our newsletter at cbcnews.ca/The National. The National Today takes you inside our journalism every afternoon.
Here we go. Just remember the greatest gift is today. Just remember your greatest gift is today.
I am a senior pastor, and suddenly I realized I don't believe any of this.
So what do you do if you're still a minister, but you don't believe in God?
Losing Our Religion, Friday at 8 on Documentary Channel.
Someone else's desk. So, drink up, go outside, and live your lives.
And thank you all for spending
A new way to watch CBC. Download the CBC TV app.
Al compañero Miguel Mario Díaz-Canel Bermúdez.
For the first time in nearly 60 years, the president of Cuba will not be a Castro. The National Assembly cast ballots today, and tomorrow, Miguel Díaz-Canel is expected to get the job. And while he doesn't carry the gravitas of a guerrilla fighter, he has served under both Castros for years, and experts say don't expect too much change.
What actually does a Miguel Díaz-Canel presidency mean for Cuba itself? Well, I don't think we should expect drastic reforms anytime soon. For one, there is an old guard in the Communist Party that is apprehensive about the reforms overall.
And here's the thing, Cuba faces big challenges. Its economy is struggling, mainly because its primary trading partner, Venezuela, is on the verge of economic and political collapse. And help from the U.S. isn't likely under Donald Trump's presidency.
President Trump is already starting to think about the 2020 campaign, and of course Florida is fundamental to that campaign, and I think he believes that the Cuban-American community in Florida are ardent supporters of a more hardline position toward Cuba.
But Cuba does have friends. China and Russia are doing a lot of business there. For part of last year, Russian trade was up 81%, worth more than $280 million.
Canadian Blood Services honored a special donor today. Beatrice Janik started donating blood after her late husband nearly died 7 decades ago. That's right, Janik, who also goes by Granny B, is Canada's oldest blood donor. And at 95, she still donates every 56 days. We caught up with her as she visited the clinic in Vancouver. And this is our moment of the day.
You're welcome today to the high hole. Let's get blood today.
Thank you for donating blood.
Hey, I'm the lucky one. I can do it.
Well,
and no medication, so I can save a baby's life. Here we go.
What do you think of all the attention?
I think it's fun for everybody. If we can encourage others to give, we've got it.
What do you get out of giving blood so often?
To me, knowing I can save somebody's life, that's so important. Why not? Give. It's there to give.
I love B. So B takes 7 vitamins a day, which is more than I do. And she says that after she gives blood, she feels great. No problems.
Right, and actually just on that point, when it comes to convincing other people who might be afraid to give blood, she's said, no pain, 20 minutes, then you'll gain. And funny enough, Canadian Blood Services, to recognize, everything she's given over the years, gave her a framed certificate, which is really nice, and some cake, which is even nicer.
Such a Canadian moment. I remember reading lots of times about people in the United States, I don't know if they still do this, but, down and out people trying to earn money by donating blood. In Canada, of course, you don't get paid to donate blood. And interesting to know, if you're the oldest blood donor in the country, you'll get, as you said, Andrew, a cake. Outstanding. All right, so she has a message for all of us and something for us to keep in mind. I won't ask any of you if you donate blood, if you don't ask me, but I will say that is the national for April 18th. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.